All right, so I'm going to welcome Jeremy Meiss to the stage. He is from CircleCi, and he is allegedly speaking about things we've learned about better software delivery principles through a pandemic. But on his screen, you will find that that is not what he's talking about. So I don't know, it's up to him. You'll figure it out soon.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about either. So I think we'll just kind of learn this as we go. Let me get everything all connected here. It is going to be the same talk. I just decided to change the title at the last minute. So, you know, lucky everyone on that. Hey, look at that. All right, so we are going to, let's get my timer started so I don't go for the full 60 minutes. I think that's what it is 60 minutes or 30. Okay, well, we'll just kind of wing all that. Okay, so let's get my screen. In case you didn't already know, tech was a really bad idea. So, all right, so we're going to talk about software delivery and kind of what high performance teams look like and some of the things that we've learned through over the last few years of a pandemic that nobody really was prepared for. Now, software delivery has never been more critical to the success of business in pretty much every industry. Every company now is a tech company. It's also never been more complex. So all the expectations that are there for delivering high quality software, incredibly fast have skyrocketed. In yesterday's kind of most exceptional product experiences that we see are expected today to be even more beautiful, intuitive, powerful, affordable, and easy to do. And it's not always that way. But the landscape of tools and platforms and architectures is constantly growing. This is the most recent, I think, CNCF landscape. I'm sure it will change, daily because it's constantly evolving. So with this rapid pace of change and the growing challenges that we kind of see with all the different complexities, how can engineering teams really not only succeed but beat out the competition? So as was mentioned, my name is Jeremy Meiss. I'm from the States, if you didn't catch from my accent or lack thereof, if it's flipped around. And just happy to be here. I've been trying to get to Australia, which is the last continent for me, other than Antarctica. But I guess if I end up in Antarctica, that is probably a problem. But yeah, just happy to be here. Glad I could, get here. And you can follow me on, there's Twitter. There's my Twitter handle. I'm sorry in advance for anything that you see or read, so at your own peril if you follow me on Twitter, but I'm from CircleCi, the director of DevRel and community, and let's get this going. And before I get too far into this, I do want to kind of call out, we're going to talk about some of the data that we have from our state of software delivery reports that we've been running, but I want to kind of call out the immensely important state of DevOps reports. And Dave from Google is going to be talking, from Dora is going to be talking about that, I believe, tomorrow. And just really looking forward to that talk, as speaking about those metrics and the new report that's come out. And it's been highly valuable to help kind of shape the industry and a lot of the practices that we have as a as an industry and the practices that we do. The biggest difference between the report that I'm going to be talking about and this report is that the DORA report is largely based on survey data that's conducted through very scientific, amazing ways that Dr. Forsgren and her team has done with looking at the data and how teams, as they take surveys and talk about how they perform. And the challenge with those as you get large survey data is that it can be potentially biased by the memory of hey, last week how many hours did I spend, deploying something? Did I really do 10 times? Maybe it was 4 times. And so there's kind of this way that as we participate, there's kind of an internal bias that we kind of have on surveys. And often when we take those surveys, it's kind of like John Allspaw says, we kind of imagine the way we do work versus the actual way that it actually gets done. We kind of call this performance described versus performance derived. So given that our platform at CircleCi is used to perform many of the activities that high-performing teams get associated with, it has allowed us to measure the actual behaviors that get performed, to get a better understanding of what a high-performing team looks like and how actual engineering work is getting done within an organization. and how their work is getting pushed through that pipeline. So, did they actually push code as often as they claim? How long did their workflows actually take? With that, we have just a massive amount of unique data on how technology teams are actually behaving in the wild. We started looking at this data in 2019 when we published our first state of software delivery report, and then we did one in 2020, which encompassed a lot of the changing dynamics of how software teams were working with the pandemic, and as everyone was now at home and things was changing, there was lockdown, and how teams were performing. And then in 2022, we decided to kind of pivot and encompass a larger data set to take into account the change of how COVID and the way that engineering teams were operating happened. And so had that as fully part of the data set. So that data set that we're going to talk about has over 257 million workflows, 44,000 organizations, over 290,000 projects, and is about 1,000 times bigger than any of the other surveys that are out there. And we don't believe in, wow, that's a half a graphic. One size doesn't fit all is what that's supposed to say. Really whatever you want it to say. One size doesn't really, so just one size. We don't believe in one size fits all metrics. Gotta love Wi-Fi. The software delivery patterns that we've observed on our platform have really kind of helped shape the data points that we see from top performing teams. But every team is different. You're not a Netflix. You're not some of the big the Flickrs and those that have been kind of defining the industry of how often that they're deploying. You're not them, and unless you're from one of those organizations. I'm sorry that you are from there, but none of the others are. And so, we can't try and fit all of these different metrics into yourself. And so it's really important for us to understand what your team is doing and then shape your performance and your benchmarks from there. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about 4 metrics that are typically related to continuous integration, and what we feel are most important for development teams to track and measure their velocity and engineering on their teams. Okay, so the 4 classic metrics that you typically see within software development is development frequency, lead time to change failure rate, and recovery from failure time. And each year we've examined kind of the workflow data that gets used on our platform and illustrates how teams on our platform are performing relative to these 4 key metrics that we've identified for specifically CI/CD. So throughput is going to be the average number of workflow runs per day. Suggested benchmark there is merge on any pull request. The duration, so that's the average time of that it takes for a workflow to run. The suggested benchmark is 10 minutes or less. And the mean time to recovery is how long it takes to recover from a failure, so get that next success is under an hour, and then the success rate for that being 90% or better on default branch. I'm going to talk about each one of those specifically and some of the things that we've seen change over time. Now, like I said, we've been publishing this research for 3 years. We're pleased to say that more teams than ever before hitting these benchmarks. This is a team of product managers, evidently, that are doing a really great job. We're probably soon going to be able to benchmark product managers, but means we've seen more and more teams kind of identify how they're delivering at high velocity, and as we've looked at the data, understanding that teams are really viewing these high velocity metrics as the differentiator for them as a competitive advantage within their product. All right, so let's jump into the data. There we go. All right, so throughput. We mentioned it's the average number of workflow runs that are per day. A workflow gets triggered when a developer makes an update to the code base in their shared repository. So that's like GitHub, GitLab, whatever, and that triggers a CI pipeline that then runs that workflow. Large commits are pushed less often, so a lower throughput may indicate your commits are quite large when you start looking at the benchmarks. When it comes to the size of commits, you really want them to be something that's easily manageable and also small enough that you can debug quickly, but also large enough that reflect that you're actually pushing meaningful change and not just trying to pad statistics. Now, if your goal is to increase your throughput, consider making smaller commits. but make those smaller commits more often. Throughput varies greatly, dependent on the needs of your business, not the needs of the business down the street. And it's also important, like the duration and mean time to resolve. So, if your pipeline is taking 8 hours to run, so that's the duration, you can only complete 3 workflows per 24-hour period, which would be the throughput. So these all kind of work together to kind of get yourself to high efficiency. And by the way, these slides will be available, so you can kind of come back and look at those as well if I happen to go through these pretty fast. So when we looked at kind of the data from 2020, the beginning of 2020 into August of 2021, 50% of the workflows in our data set were running less than once per day, 0.7 times per day on average. But when we look at like the 95th percentile at their top, they were run over 35 times per day. So that meant like once every 45 minutes, these teams were doing a new push throughout that 24-hour period. So over 35 times per day. Now, your software delivery cadence should be dependent, again, like I continue to say, and I'm going to say this throughout the talk, it has to be dependent on your team, what your team building on your business needs. Making changes to your project within an automated testing suite and a workflow means your organization is no longer going to get blocked by manually waiting for those manual quality assurance checks that kind of sometimes can block you. So with a fully automated software development pipeline, it's up to you how frequently and when updates are delivered to your end users, and it's important that it's a part of your business needs. Many of the percentiles that we've seen over, from the start of 2020 to, even into August, we saw this slight dip as the pandemic was hitting. April 2020, you can kind of see a dip happen just a little bit before that, which is that time, kind of March period. And then the max was reached in 2020, in April of 2020. Now, when we think about this, what was happening around that time was people were starting to, companies taking their engineering teams, shoring up their business as quickly as they possible because they knew they had to get, the business was changing. People were, there was lockdown, there was, people weren't going to the office anymore. And so the way that they were working had to change. And so the business needed to, shore up a lot of the things. So there was focusing on resolving their bug tickets, issues, et cetera, all of that in order to really lean on the stability of the platform. So throughput kind of jumped in April 2020 and then kind of just settled, for the most part, back to pretty consistent. Let's see here. Yeah, we also saw a lot more activity was happening on the weekends than before, than had previously, prior to, the pandemic. And more hours in a day where CI activities, continuous integration activities, were actually happening. Roughly 14 hours a day where it had been 11 or 12. So when we think about like what changed is people are at home now. They're not sitting in a car or in a train making that commute into the office. They're now at home, finding themselves spending more time doing CI activities than what they had been doing. So we really kind of saw through this data is that most teams are really not deploying this dozens of times per day. They're not even validating their software, dozens of times per day. So while it's not really untrue that a high-performing team description is one that deploys a lot of projects, it really just means that one project, it's probably just one of those projects, is actually performing at that speed. And a lot of their other projects tend to not be, which influences. So when they take a survey or when they say, hey, we do 14 times a day, that's probably just related to one of the projects on the team, not the entire things that the company's doing. So when we look at like the total sample of everything going on with an engineering department versus maybe just the primary thing, it's important to understand that a particular number of deploys per day is not really the goal, but continuous validation of your code base via your pipeline is. So you figure out what that takes to continuously validate that, and then there you've identified what your kind of target is, your baseline for your company of how many times you should be throughput per day. All right, so when we think about high-performing teams and throughput, how you can kind of get there, it's more valuable for your organization to see changes and progress week over week as you're looking at your benchmarks and at your reporting. And it's also important to prioritize lean, agile software development patterns with small kind of incremental changes. Testing really removes kind of that threat of changes that get introduced by errors. And so making sure you're testing well and pushing small changes often, like we said, kind of really can help you innovate on the project, knowing that any of the undesirable impact that you might have from a change is resolved because you've got everything tested. All right, so duration. We're going to speed this up here. So length of time it takes for workflow to run is that duration. And it is one of the most important metrics because to get that fast feedback cycle that's important for CI and CD is it's got to have throughput and mean time to recovery all kind of hinge on the duration of your builds. So the ultimate goal, like we said, of CI is fast feedback. Fast fail is kind of this idea. A failed build signal needs to get to developers quickly, and because you can't really fix what you're not aware of. So they also need the information from those failed builds. So getting, it's important to have an organization that's understands that failure is actually okay. So if you work at a company that does not like failure when you're doing software development, talk to me afterwards, because that's just it's not how life works. So getting the right information comes from writing rigorous tests for your software. So in the data, we saw that 5% of builds finished in around 12 seconds. And when you think about 5%, that doesn't seem like a whole lot. But when you're talking about 270 million builds, then that 5% is actually a pretty significant number of jobs. So when we think about why is 5% just doing it in less than 12 seconds? What can you actually get done in 12 seconds? If you think about it, it's probably not a whole lot, but you could probably do quite a bit, because if you're doing unit tests that can be parallelized and it's just checking one thing, that could be done in 12 seconds. You have an artifact that's been built that now needs just to be pushed to S3, small file. That could be done in 12 seconds. So, this 5% number for duration is not insignificant, but was an interesting statistic. From December of 2019, which was the earliest time that we observed, to all the way through September 2021, durations pretty much just increased on average. And that was starting to show us as we look through it that more and more teams are starting to adopt more mature applications and increasing their DevOps maturity across their platform, which typically, as we saw through the data, was more rigorous testing was happening and using a lot more third-party tools within that. So that does mean that your workflows are going to take a little bit longer, which is why workflow time actually increased. That was one of the key things we did see throughout the pandemic, was that this ramp up in duration that really kind of started across all of those percentiles, and then it's kind of stayed pretty consistent in the trending from then on, was because people were actually starting to do more testing, which is good. We want to see more testing, and if you're not testing code, come talk to me afterwards. The median, let's go back. The median puts us at right around the 4-minute mark, which, as a developer, if you're able to, get good quality feedback in 4 minutes on any of your builds, like who is a developer that if you could run a build and be able to know quickly, like 4 minutes or less, whether it worked or not, who would love that? Those that didn't raise your hand, you're lying. So the 95th percentile, that's closer to this like 30 kind of minute. And for a lot of companies, depending on what's being built, 30 minutes is probably about right. Like if you're building Java or whatever you have has to be compiled, like there's a lot of overhead there that's going to take a little bit longer. So some of those durations, like 30 minutes for a lot of companies, probably is a really good sweet spot. And it's probably a really good place to be. But with the duration, we really kind of saw the mean kind of fell as it was kind of heading into the pandemic, and it was pretty steady. Everything that the duration increased year over year, though as we see it, did have that slight dip in April, which is marked there, and then it continued to increase. Another thing we saw, duration on default branches was actually faster at every percentile over non-default branches. Default branch being like your main, and your non-default being like testing and your feature branches. So this was telling us the mainline, people that were responsible for the mainline branch were very insistent on making sure that durations were smaller or were shorter, but as they were working on the features and the kind of testing branches, weren't as concerned about how long those took. So increasing the efficiency of your runs and reducing your duration is one of the important things for getting kind of a high-performing team within duration as part of that. So that looks like using test splitting to split your tests up so that you're not just running one after another. You're able to parallelize across. It's a hard word to say. Parallelize across your build times. I'm sorry, your builds. Making sure that you're doing multiple jobs and multiple tests at the same time. Using Docker images, which have been built specifically for CI, so that they're not like just a full Ubuntu image when all you're really wanting to do is build Ruby. You just have an image that just has the core pieces of Ruby and everything else is stripped out. Like that's a specific for CI Docker image. Using caching strategies, which allow for reuse. So instead of, if you're building Node.js, instead of having it constantly have to build the NPM model, pull the NPM modules every single time, you're able to cache those so that if nothing has changed, you can save time there. Use caching strategy. I already said that one. Use optimal size for the machine to running your workflow. So making sure that you're using, larger jobs are going to benefit from larger compute, which actually means it's going to then run faster, which means you ultimately could save some money on build times over that period. So a way to get a high-performing team with duration is these four. All right, so now we're on to mean time to recovery. This is the average time between a pipeline's failure and that first success. And we feel this is really the most important metric on that list. The ability of your team to recover from, as quickly as possible when something fails, time and time again is that ultimate goal of an agile development team. How quickly can you recover from that failure? The more robust testing and corresponding output you get from those tests, the faster it is you're going to be able to resolve those issues. The shortest that your MTTR is going to be, is equal to what your duration is. So for example, if a workflow run resulted in a failed state, and then a developer immediately knew what the problem was, pushes that fix, the full duration of a successful workflow still needs to happen in order for that to be complete and to get back to that green. So build health is going to be extremely important here to make sure you can get back to a green build quickly. Brandon Byers at ThoughtWorks, he talked about the importance of build health and how important it is to ensure a steady delivery cadence. One of the things he said here is that it's the easiest way is just when you have a red build, go back to the last build that works, push that. That's the quickest way to get to green, so you don't have things sitting here not working. Get it back to green and then make your changes. Just simply revert back to the one that broke is a great way to get back to green. But you still got to have good build health so that when you are able to get that finished, it's able to do the new build is going to have a shorter duration. Most of the percentiles here are in that lower range, with the fifth percentile being pretty consistently 2 minutes. That it'll sit in a failed state before a new build is recovered. A lot of times in those scenarios, not going to point any fingers, but that tends to be like one developer pushes a commit, realizes, developer 2 realizes that where they messed it up, and I didn't read the code of conduct whether or not I could cuss, so I had to catch myself there. And didn't know where they screwed up. There's a term. And so, developer 2 pushes the good commit that comes right afterwards, and everything's fixed because they're already running in parallel, figuring out what, dumb guy around the corner did, or that dumb guy being me, because that was usually my issue. Or it could be the same one. I know I've pushed things, and then realized quickly what I broke and pushed the fix immediately. So that 5% down there really accounts for that really quick kind of 2-minute period. At the 50th, we're still seeing about an hour until it's recovered properly, which still is on the lower side there when we look at the time. And that did improve a little bit, and it doesn't show because it's such a broad graph here. But that did improve a little bit over the time span of the last year and a half. But then we start to see things that really start to get bigger and bigger. The mean here sits at about 14.85 hours, which really kind of illustrates the idea that somebody pushes a build and then goes home, which it kind of goes against the idea of why we do agile software development, or even why we do CI, is push the build and just say, ha, yeeted it out there and just run home. But it did happen. Like, that's, when you think about that 14.85 hours, that's about the time from end of day to the start of the next day. For you, Baruch, that's how you're supposed to do things. It's just yeet it out there and go. Yeah, so you're rocking, doing it great. When we look at the 90th and 95th percentile, this is where it really gets interesting, because it's not just going home, it's like a whole weekend gone. So that's generally not what you want to see. Sorry, not what you generally want to see. But if we could be a little pragmatic here, because chances are, what we saw with this as we delve deeper, that was more those development branches. It's not the production branch. That's the non-default. That's the, hey, I'm going to test and see if this newfangled framework I'm going to set up for my website, or the new Tailspin CSS, whether or not that's going to work for me, and just throw it out there. And then I'm going to go home and I'll check it when I get back. Like, that's okay, because it's not a default branch. It's not like your main product. So that's one thing we really started to see. It was test builds and feature branches. In the 2 years, mean time to recovery was impacted most by the end of year holidays, which that kind of makes sense when you start to look at how teams, everybody's gone on holidays. And so that impacted the business the most, which is why a lot of teams, put a pause on doing things over the holidays. So these here, for high-performing teams, most important factor to optimize that is, write tests, implement tooling, debug on the remote machine, and optimize your duration. We're going to speed up here. I've ad-libbed a little too much. All right, number of passing runs, total number of runs divided by total number of runs over a period of time, success rate. And that is, any given project is going to be kind of different without knowing, the different development patterns that you use. But a topic or feature branch of a project is going to have a lower success rate than your default branch, and that just is going to show that you're kind of focusing on feature, increasing innovation and experimentation. So we only track success rate on default branches. So that was just under 75% throughout the pandemic. Rose a little bit in April 2020, but for the most part has stayed for the last year and a half on production branches. Now, when you think about like the default branches, the non-default, those start to get a little more interesting, which does kind of goes as red, green as people are trying out new things, really reflected on the non-default branches that, about 50% were on the fail side. We did see, I mentioned in April 2020, first big bump, but when you're resolving bugs and trying to get, be ready for the fact that everybody's gonna be at home, you're gonna start seeing a higher success rate there. But we did notice that more and more teams are starting to accept this. Default branches are the ones that have the high success rates, and that feature dev branches should have low. And again, if you have a metric that all of your builds, regardless of if it's a production build or a test build, should have a high success rate, come talk to me. All right, so getting success rate. I need to update that. I did that one wrong. Basically making sure, should always be, I didn't update this, I'm sorry. Always be high on the primary branch of your service. So that you just choose that. Focus on the primary branch for your success rate. And feature branches can have that lower success rate without it negatively affecting the product. So, making sure that your, low success tends to be accompanied by a long MTTR is really a sign that your testing output is not sufficient for debugging. So making sure you're getting your testing right, getting all that flow in. The slides that get pushed out will have that updated, sorry. So what a team looks like, duration, the benchmark should be 5 to 10 minutes. TTTR, we see this, between 2019, 2020, and then, this year's report. Less than 60 minutes should be the average time between failure. Success rate should be more than 90% on default branch. We've seen that start to come up over the last 2-3 years. Throughput should continue to be what it is for your company as often as your business requires, but we have seen those start to go up. All right, so achieving top performing status really kind of, it does cost time and money, but it's not like, it's pretty clear that more organizations are realizing the importance of that, as we've seen through our data over the last 2 years, 3 years really. And business leaders are starting to outfit their teams with a lot of the tooling and a lot of the practices and the culture necessary to become a high-performing team. With that, we are done. I will show you, first off, here real quick, if you want to get the 2020 and 2022 reports, easiest way, if you can't scan that, just go to circle.ci/SSD 2020 and SSD 2022. We'll get the reports. You don't have to sign up for anything. I'm not going to come, send you fun letters. You can download it without signing up, but highly recommend you getting both of those reports. And then we also at the CircleCi booth, come by, say hi to the team, and we are doing a giveaway for some headphones and some amazing single malt whiskey. So definitely come by and scan that at the booth. And with that, I am done. Thank you very much.